The number that shouldn't exist. It begins with a number, not carved on stone nor written on papyrus, but hidden in the language of the earth itself, 97,000. For most, it's just a figure, abstract, meaningless, distant. But to those who study the long, slow memory of our planet, it is something else entirely. It is a mark, a rhythm, a whisper buried deep within ice, sediment, and myth. Because every 97,000 years, the Earth resets, ice expands, seas retreat, civilizations vanish, and something, or someone, writes over the story of humankind. We live in a world obsessed with beginnings. We speak of Mesopotamia, Egypt, the Indus Valley, as if civilization were a light suddenly switched on 6,000 years ago. But what if that light was merely rekindled after an age of darkness? No one remembers. In the last 2 decades, glaciologists studying cores from Antarctica and Greenland began noticing a strange recurrence in their data. Layers of dust, volcanic ash, and isotopic shifts, all converging on a specific cycle, roughly 97,000 years between massive global disruptions. Not 100,000, not 90,000, 97, precise, repeating, relentless. When those findings first appeared in journals, most scientists saw them as coincidence, a geological quirk. But outside academia, in the quieter corners of research, among independent archaeologists, mythographers, and those who chase forbidden timelines, the number 97,000 began to resonate, because that same figure appears hidden, encoded, in the strangest places. Ancient Sumerian king lists, Egyptian astronomical ceilings, the Mayan long count adjusted backward. Even fragments from Vedic cosmology seem to echo it. Could it all be chance? Or were these distant civilizations trying to leave us a clue about a time that once was, and then was erased? Imagine this. The year is not 2025, not 10,000 BC, but 97,000 years ago. The Sahara is green, a sea of rivers and lakes. Antarctica is not a frozen tomb, but a temperate land of valleys and forests. And scattered across the planet, from the Pacific shelf to the highlands of what would become Peru, rise lights, voices, and technologies we can't even begin to comprehend. No ruins remain, no monuments stand, yet their fingerprints persist. In myths of gods who descended, in flood stories repeated by every culture on Earth, and in those inexplicable megaliths that seem to have been built by hands far older than recorded time allows. If that world truly existed, then its erasure was total, almost as if someone wanted it forgotten. For centuries, we've trusted the timeline carved by modern archaeology. The first humans emerged roughly 200,000 years ago, but civilization, organized, literate, technological, only appeared after the last ice age, around 10,000 BC. Yet, the deeper we dig, the more that story fractures. We find polished stonework under layers far older than it should be. We find maps showing Antarctica without ice. We find oral traditions that speak not of creation, but of reconstruction, as if humanity had lived, died, and lived again. And then there's that number, 97,000. It stands like a wall between what we know and what we dare to remember. What if the last great cataclysm, the one that drowned ancient continents and scattered survivors to the corners of the earth, wasn't the first? What if it was simply the latest in a repeating cycle, the 97,000-year rhythm of destruction and rebirth? Somewhere, deep beneath the oceans, perhaps traces of that forgotten world still sleep. Structures now entombed under miles of silt and pressure. Machines long turned to dust. Symbols whose meaning our languages can no longer reach. And maybe the myths of gods who came from the stars were not tales of beings descending from above, but memories of our own ancestors, returning from the ashes of a civilization erased before history began. But here lies the question that keeps echoing across every field of inquiry. If the Earth has indeed been resetting every 97,000 years, who is doing the resetting? Nature? Time? Or something else entirely? As night falls over the modern world, as our satellites orbit above the same planet that once held forests in Antarctica, one can't help but wonder, What if the stories of Atlantis, Mu, and the first gods are not myths, but echoes from that forgotten civilization of 97,000 years ago? And if so, why was it buried? Because perhaps somewhere, someone decided that humanity should begin again, without memory, without warning. But what came next would change everything. The age before memory, because after the question comes the reconstruction, not of buildings or cities, but of a world, a living map of rivers that no longer run, forests that no longer breathe, coastlines that now sleep 300 feet beneath the sea. To chase the number 97,000 is to walk into the age before memory, when the Earth wore a face we would not recognize. Picture the planet then. The poles were not what they are now, and the sky was a ledger written with different winds. Glaciers moved like white continents, slow and implacable. Yet there were belts of warmth where life grew loud and complicated. The Sahara, which we call a desert as if that were its true name, was a green engine of storms and lakes. The Indian Ocean rose and fell over submerged plains like a sleeping animal. The Pacific hid stair-stepped islands where, later, the ocean would keep its own counsel and seal them away. No chronicles survived that period because paper and clay tablets belong to younger worlds. But there are other archives, stone, ice, and the memories that cultures carry like fire across generations. When you hold those pieces together, they point not to a civilization that came too early, but to a season of Earth that encouraged civilization to bloom in forms we cannot yet imagine. The key is not that people were clever too soon. The key is that the planet itself invited them. This is where 97,000 stops being a number and starts acting like a scale. Think of it as a clock that is not on our wrist but in our horizon. A long tide of climate, magnetism, and sunlight, cresting and breaking in intervals just shy of 100 millennia. The crest brings warmth, stability, and long summers that last for generations. The trough drags ice forward, narrows the green belts, and rearranges where life can concentrate. In that rhythm, there are windows, thousands of years wide, where experiment becomes possible. Cities, sail, timekeeping that is not just the moon overhead, but the patience to count beyond human lives. Most stories about lost cultures leap straight to technology, engines, towers, metals that refuse rust. That is not the first chapter here. The first chapter is organization. It is knowing the season of the Earth well enough to plant where the river will be 30 years from now. It is watching the sky not for God's tempers, but for the subtleties of pre-dawn stars that announce monsoon patterns a decade in advance. It is circles of stone, not for worship, but for memory. Rings that measure solstices against mountain shadows to decide when to move entire populations to higher ground before the long thaw takes a sudden breath and floods the lowlands. If you listen closely to the myths, you can hear it under the thunder of the gods, the logistics of a world that could plan in centuries. The teachers came, say the old stories, and taught us how to count the years. That is the scent of administration, of civil calendars stretching like bridges between generations. It is the kind of sophistication that leaves few artifacts because it is not made of gold. It is made of agreements. Imagine a coastal culture on a shelf now drowned, a ribbon of cities, none higher than 5 stories, each shaped like a shell to turn wind into voice. They farmed not fields but terraces of edible seagrass. In lagoons they fenced with stone. Their power was not fire but timing. Tidal mills that turned with a precision fed by the moon, turning grain, lifting water, sounding distant beacons across the fog. If you expect skyscrapers, you will miss it. If you expect simple huts, you will miss it too. It sits between, industrial in method, pastoral in face, because that is what the planet allowed. And inland, where the glaciers did not reach, forests rose so thick that light became a rumor. Here the people carved roads by cultivating absence, avenues of trees trained to grow like arches, their roots braided into living bridges, their trunks engraved with patterns that read like books when the sun reached a certain angle. The writing was the forest itself, and when winter deepened, the script closed over, and the text would not be legible again until spring. a civilization that learned to store not grain alone, but meaning inside landscapes that renew themselves. We look for pottery shards and bronze blades, and we should. But if your descendants wanted to signal you across 97,000 years, would they trust clay? Or would they choose something the earth protects, burial under ice, encoding in coastline geometry, echoes in orbital alignments? This is why the number keeps surfacing in places that do not speak the same language, not because the ancients agreed on everything, but because they agreed on the interval. And yet the age before memory did not mistake permanence for safety. They lived under long warnings. The ice sings before it moves. The ocean rehearses before it rises. The sun hints before it flares. Those people knew, by bone, by shoreline, by sky, that the window would close. The old myths do not only describe floods and fires, they talk of departures. Not vanishing into the stars, but calculated withdrawals, up river valleys, into caverns of salt and basalt, along stairways cut into mountainsides where the rock meets the cloud. They planned to endure. They assumed the seas would repossess their cities, the forests their roads, the deserts their lakes. Their architecture was not conquest. It was camouflage against time. You might ask, if they prepared, why did they vanish? Because preparation is not immunity. When the long tide turns, it does so with layered violence. The first blow is climate, the rearrangement of where food can be found. The second is geological, faults waking to the new weight of water and ice. The third is human, migration pressures turning knowledge into currency and then into secrecy. In a world shrinking under ice and rising seas, the maps that still work become power, and power draws a curtain. Here we reach the edge of what can be reconstructed without artifacts you can hold. But threads remain, the shell shape of certain megalithic walls that seem built to listen rather than to stand against war. The obsessive alignment of ancient earthworks to stars that are not the brightest, but the most reliable over millennia. The way some origin myths tie sovereignty not to bloodlines, but to calendar keeping, as if the right to rule was the right to say when to move, when to plant, when to go underground. So when we say civilization 97,000 years ago, do not imagine a mirror of our cities with different costumes. Imagine a social technology honed to ride a planetary cycle. Their genius was not louder than ours. It was quieter. It left fewer scars and relied on rhythms we've forgotten how to hear. If you seek proof only in metals that defy rust, you may never find them. But if you search for the shape of intention, the signature of planning measured in centuries, the Earth begins to answer. Then, a final image before this chapter closes. A cliff that is now far from any sea, cut with shallow basins that fill with rain after every storm. At solstice, the basins shine in a pattern only visible from above. They map a coastline that no longer exists, an ancient shore traced in inland light. Whoever carved it knew what would come. They left a memory in stone water so that, when the ocean reclaimed their cities, the map would migrate uphill and wait for someone to look down. And someone did. A pilot in the 1950s, a satellite in the 1990s, a drone last summer. Each saw the same geometry. Each dismissed it as coincidence. But in a small notebook in a private archive, that geometry is labeled with 3 numbers, 24, 41, 97. The first 2 are angles. The last is the interval, the clock, the whisper. We are left with a question large enough to swallow whole histories. If they encoded warnings in landscapes and sky, if they constructed memory that could outweigh ice, what else did they leave behind that we have not yet learned to read? Because what came next was not a ruin, not a legend, but an artifact in the wrong place, carrying a signature no geology could explain, and finding it would set off a quiet war over who is allowed to remember. It began with a sound, not the echo of a shovel, not the hum of an engine, but a frequency, deep, resonant, almost biological. In 1997, a hydrophone stationed in the South Pacific captured it, a single, low-pitched signal that rolled across the ocean floor like thunder beneath the world. Scientists called it the bloop, Publicly, they dismissed it as ice cracking, tectonic groans, maybe even the call of an unknown whale. But quietly, deep within the files of oceanographic institutes, the data was marked anomalous, because the origin of the sound was triangulated to a point on the seafloor that should have been barren rock, yet reflected sonar as if something constructed lay beneath. Coordinates: 50 degrees, 100 degrees. Depth: 4,300 meters. Shape: geometric. No one was meant to follow up, but someone did. In 2001, a joint expedition under the pretext of studying hydrothermal vents approached that same region. The data that emerged was never formally published, but fragments leaked years later through anonymous archives, maps showing unnatural symmetries under the sediment, a hexagonal pattern nearly 2 kilometers wide, with edges aligned to true north and east. The divers never descended. The pressure was too great. Instead, they sent down remote submersibles. Their cameras returned only darkness, turbulence, and once, just once, a glimpse of something impossible. Angles. Right angles. It looked like the corner of a platform, its surface engraved with repeating depressions, like sockets for tools that no longer exist. One image, the clearest of all, captured an inscription of 3 nested spirals converging on a single point. No known culture used that symbol, and yet the pattern matched, down to the millimeter. Engravings later found on Neolithic stones in Malta, Ireland, and the Pacific island of Pohnpei. How could identical symbols appear across continents separated by oceans and tens of thousands of years? Unless they were inherited. Unless those Neolithic builders were carrying memories, blueprints from something far older. Something that once stood on the seafloor of the South Pacific 97,000 years ago. When the images reached the surface, chaos followed. The data was classified under the code name Project Seraphis. The official statement claimed equipment malfunction and corrupted footage. But rumors spread among the crew, stories of instruments going haywire, compasses spinning, and divers feeling an inexplicable vibration in their bones, as if the ocean itself were alive around them. Some said they saw lights beneath the submersible, pulses moving in regular intervals like the beating of a heart. Others swore they heard a voice. Decades later, one of the engineers who had worked on the project spoke anonymously in an interview that would never air. He said, "It wasn't a building, it was something turned off." When asked what he meant, he paused. Then he whispered, "We found the top of it." That sentence, 6 words, was enough to reignite an entire movement of forbidden archaeology. Because if the structure was truly mechanical, or even partially so, it meant that technology existed before recorded civilization, buried by time and pressure. And then the cycle repeats. Suppression, ridicule, silence. The expedition records vanish. The coordinates are erased from later maps, but the number 97,000 appears again, this time not as a date, but as a frequency, a harmonic resonance detected in the vibrations of the bloop. Some physicists noticed the waveform pulsed exactly 97,000 microseconds apart. Coincidence, perhaps. But among those who believed the site was artificial, it was another whisper of the ancient clock. A countdown, not of years, but of awakening. Meanwhile, on land, the same symbol, the triple spiral, was being rediscovered in unexpected places. In Turkey's Göbekli Tepe, carved into pillars thousands of years before writing. In the Nazca Desert, hidden within the geometry of certain lines when viewed from above. In submerged ruins off the coast of Japan, where divers mapped steps and corridors too smooth to be natural. The same pattern, spiral within spiral, drawn toward a central void, appeared everywhere. Some saw it as art, others as a message. To those who dared look closer, it was the signature of a civilization that once spoke in geometry, encoding their knowledge not in words, but in proportions. And if those proportions were scaled up, some matched the orbital ratios of Earth and Venus. That discovery shattered the scientific detachment of even the most skeptical minds. How could Neolithic builders know orbital resonance? Because perhaps they didn't discover it. Perhaps they remembered it. By the mid-2010s, a quiet coalition of researchers began to piece together the fragments, the geometry, the myths, the oceanic anomalies. They called their informal network the Chronists. Not archaeologists, not mystics, but hybrid thinkers, engineers, linguists, astronomers, searching for continuity across epochs. Their premise was radical yet simple. Humanity's story is not linear. It is cyclical, and every 97,000 years, a great civilization rises, reaches for the stars, or for something beyond the stars, and is erased by the same forces that built it. But in the latest cycle, the erasure failed. A fragment survived. A machine under the Pacific still pulses faintly. The Chronists claimed it was not a remnant. It was a beacon. And if that beacon still functioned, even in fragments, then it was waiting for something or someone to answer. But knowledge like this does not remain hidden forever. Governments noticed. Satellites were redirected. Budgets shifted. Within a few years, expeditions were quietly organized under the guise of deep-sea geological studies, and then, in 2022, a ship vanished. Its last recorded transmission was brief, almost whispered, descending to 4,000 meters, sonar interference increasing. Wait, there's light down there. Then silence. The coordinates of the disappearance matched the same site. 50 degrees. 100° W, the forgotten place, the sleeping machine, the cradle of 97,000 years. So now the question deepens. If the ocean holds remnants of a forgotten civilization, could the ice hold its memory? Because while the South Pacific trembles, the Antarctic is beginning to thaw, revealing something beneath its miles of frozen secrecy. And what lies there will force us to confront not just what humanity once was, but what it was designed to become. And that revelation begins beneath the ice. Antarctica has always been our final silence. It is the end of the map, the continent of white sleep, a land that remembers without speaking. Yet lately, that silence has been changing its tone. As satellites skim the pole, they have begun to record strange pulses in the ice, low-frequency waves that ripple outward in patterns too ordered to be random. To most geologists, these are tremors, echoes of shifting glaciers, but to a handful of researchers, they sound like the heartbeat of something that was never meant to wake. In 2016, radar from the European Space Agency revealed an anomaly beneath the Western Shelf, a structure stretching nearly 30 kilometers, perfectly straight, lying 2 miles below the surface. Officially, it was dismissed as a ridge formation. Unofficially, it became known as the line. Its edges were so sharp that even the software struggled to smooth them. And running parallel to it, at exact intervals of 97 meters, were small voids, chambers, evenly spaced, like ribs of a colossal organism frozen mid-breath. A team of glaciologists, led by Dr. Anaya Ruiz, was granted clearance to study the formation. Her reports, before they vanished from public archives, describe radar reflections inconsistent with ice or rock. The surface absorbs the signal, she wrote, but beneath it, there's something that returns the wave as if from a mirror, not metallic, something else. On the final page of her notes, scrawled in pencil, a single phrase remains. It's not a ridge, it's architecture. If this was true, then the last untouched continent on Earth was not untouched at all. It was a tomb, and maybe also a vault. When the first core sample was extracted, scientists found something stranger still. Particles of carbonized material embedded deep within the ice, organic but ancient. The dating confused the instruments. It returned not one age, but two. The upper layer read 30,000 years old. The deeper layer read 97,000, as if something had burned, been buried, and then burned again when the cycle repeated. The pattern of the ice layers matched the 97,000-year rhythm seen in oceanic sediments. The same pulse that haunted the bloop, the same interval carved in forgotten stones, now appeared inside the bones of the Earth's last frontier. It was no longer a coincidence. It was a language. Ruiz's team drilled deeper. At 2.4 miles, the drill struck something hollow. The pressure sensors spiked. Instruments froze. What came up with the next core segment was neither ice nor stone, but a thin film of crystalline material, perfectly transparent, like glass. Under polarized light, it shimmered in a geometry that shifted when viewed from different angles. Triangular, then circular, then something for which there is no word. No known mineral behaves like it. No contamination could explain it. When warmed, the film emitted a faint electromagnetic hum, pulsing every 97 seconds. It was as if the ice had been guarding a message, and that message had begun to respond. Within weeks, the camp went silent. Satellite phones stopped transmitting. Supply drones found nothing but tents collapsed under snow. The coordinates were quietly sealed off under environmental restrictions. Dr. Ruiz was listed as missing. Her family received only a single shipment from the logistics company, a sealed crate marked with her initials. Inside was a notebook, half burned, and a shard of that same transparent material. The notebook's last page carried a sketch of 3 spirals intersecting above a triangle. Underneath, in faint pencil, the words, "It's the same frequency, the same symbol, the same cycle, the same silence returning." For centuries, legends have whispered of a land before the ice, a kingdom of knowledge buried beneath endless snow. The Greeks called it Hyperborea, the place beyond the north wind. The Egyptians spoke of Taneter, the divine land of the south, where the first gods hid their wisdom after the flood. Every culture seems to have known that something sleeps at the ends of the earth. What if those myths were not dreams, but distant echoes of a truth buried since the last reset? As global temperatures rise and the Antarctic ice retreats, satellites have begun to capture glimpses of circular formations along the coast, faint outlines of what appear to be megalithic rings buried beneath hundreds of feet of permafrost. Some claim they're natural. Others, when comparing them with aerial scans of Stonehenge and Nabta Playa, note eerie similarities. The same proportions, the same orientation toward the solstices, as if every ancient monument we know were an imitation, a memory of something far older still frozen in the south. If there truly was a civilization 97,000 years ago, Antarctica would have been one of its crowns. At that time, ice did not dominate it. Lush valleys stretched where glaciers now reign. Rivers fed inland seas. The continent was alive, and if a people thrived there, when the world tilted and froze, their only chance was to sleep, to hide their world in ice and wait for the next cycle. The evidence accumulates quietly beneath layers of denial. A drone scan in 2023 caught a brief electromagnetic flare over the same coordinates as Dr. Ruiz's expedition. The pattern repeated 3 times, 97 pulses, each separated by precisely 97 seconds. When decoded as binary, the signal translated to a simple, chilling message. Awake. Is it a malfunction, an echo from human interference, or something else? Something stirring after an age of silence. Whatever it is, the hum grows louder each year, synchronized with the melting ice. The same rhythm repeats in microseismic data, even in faint fluctuations of Earth's magnetic field. The chronists have begun calling it the reverberation. They believe it's the pulse of the forgotten machine, reaching through stone, water, and time itself, a summons from the last civilization that knew how to speak the planet's language. If they are right, we are not discovering Antarctica. Antarctica is remembering us. But for all its beauty and terror, this revelation raises one unbearable question. If this pulse is the sound of something waking, what happens when it finally opens its eyes? Because what comes next is not discovery. It is confrontation, the moment when the living world meets the memory of what it once was. And that moment is coming soon. Every civilization believes it is the first to awaken, the first to reach for the stars, the first to name the sea. But the truth may be the opposite, that humanity has awakened many times before, only to fall back into the same dream. This is the pattern historians refuse to see, because to accept it would mean our story isn't a straight line of progress, but a spiral, a cycle of ascent, collapse, and amnesia repeating every 97,000 years. The ancient texts never called it history, they called it the forgetting. Across continents and languages, the same idea surfaces like a scar under the skin. The Maya spoke of the suns, worlds that rose and perished in fire, wind, and flood. The Hindus called it the Yuga cycle, each age ending in destruction, cleansing, renewal. The Greeks told of ages of gold, silver, bronze, and iron, descending into darkness before being reborn. And the Sumerians, our oldest known civilization, wrote of kings who ruled for 200 years before the flood. Why do all these myths insist that the world has ended before, that knowledge has been erased and rewritten? Because perhaps they aren't myths at all. Perhaps they are fragments of warning, passed down like flickering embers from the last cycle of human memory. What we call progress might just be remembering. The Great Forgetting was not a single event. It was a process, a long unraveling of knowledge, an enforced amnesia. Every flood, every cataclysm, every reset stripped the survivors of tools, language, and identity until they no longer remembered who they had been. Then, when the ice receded, they began again, thinking themselves new. But beneath their new stories, the old symbols lingered, spirals, stars, and serpents winding through creation myths like traces of a language too old to name. Consider the serpent. To modernize it is temptation, danger, chaos. Yet in the oldest carvings, those at Göbekli Tepe, in the ruins of Chavin, and in the temples of Angkor, it coils not in menace, but in reverence. The serpent is the cycle of time itself, swallowing its tail, eternally consuming and renewing. In some myths, it circles the world every 97,000 years, closing the loop of memory. The ancients may have used this creature to describe the very mechanism that keeps history turning, a cosmic reset that wipes the slate clean. But how does one erase a planet's memory? The answer might not lie in myth, but in magnetism. Every 97,000 years, the Earth's magnetic field weakens, reverses, and rebuilds itself. During that transition, radiation from the sun floods the planet, scorching atmospheres, igniting wildfires, disrupting every biological rhythm. Satellites would die instantly today, but back then, civilizations built of stone and song would simply vanish. Their monuments might survive, their myths might echo, but the people, those who remembered, would fade. What follows such chaos is not extinction, but confusion. The survivors repopulate, rebuild, reinterpret. And just like that, history restarts, scrubbed clean by the planet itself. The chronists believe the last reversal happened approximately 97,200 years ago. They call it the magnetic exodus. To them, the forgotten civilization didn't perish. It hid. Its remnants encoded their knowledge not in language or machines, but in harmonics, geometry, and magnetic fields. They left signals buried in the ice, the oceans, and the very orbit of the Earth, breadcrumbs for the next humanity to find when it was ready to remember. But someone, or something, did not want that memory recovered. When Ruiz's notebook surfaced, fragments of her private correspondence hinted that the anomaly beneath the ice wasn't just a structure, it was a repository, a vault meant to preserve data against planetary resets, using magnetized crystalline lattices instead of silicon, a kind of planetary hard drive, storing not files but fields. The ice was its lock. As the world warmed, the lock was breaking. That might explain the strange behavior of global magnetic readings since 2018, the wandering poles, the shifting auroras, the subtle interference in satellite communication. If the vault is activating, the field itself would begin to fluctuate. Earth is not simply thawing, it is booting. But here lies the terrifying part. Every cycle, every reawakening demands a new forgetting. If something designed this 97,000-year rhythm, whether natural, artificial, or divine, it seems to require that memory be wiped clean before the next world begins. Why? Because knowledge without context is dangerous. A civilization that remembers too much might resist the reset. Maybe that's why so few traces of the last one survive. Maybe someone ensured that remembering would hurt. This possibility changes everything. The Great Forgetting was not an accident. It was a protocol. Imagine if the machine beneath the ice, the beacon under the Pacific, and the anomalies across ancient sites are all parts of a planetary mechanism, a system built to erase and restart civilization when it drifts too far from balance. If true, then every flood myth, every tale of fire from the sky, was not divine punishment but maintenance. Earth cleansing its own data, starting a new version of humanity. But what if this time something went wrong? The climate shifts faster than models predict. Magnetic fields wander without pattern. The oceans vibrate with voices we cannot trace. The 97,000-year clock may be off schedule, running late, or worse, running early. The chronists fear that the awakening beneath the ice is not memory returning. It is the system rebooting. And if humanity is the byproduct of that system, our role in the next cycle may already be written. That's why they've gone underground. That's why governments seal archives, silence explorers, and censor satellite data. Because if the Great Forgetting truly ended, if we began to remember everything, then the mechanism might see us as a malfunction. It might decide to start over. And if the last reset buried a world of light and order 97,000 years ago, what kind of storm would this one bring? Because the first signs are already here. Heat where there should be ice. Hums where there should be silence. The earth is speaking again in the language of its oldest architects. And soon we'll have to decide whether we want to listen or forget once more. Because the truth, if it exists at all, may lie not in what we build, but in who built us. If the Great Forgetting was not an accident, if the 97,000-year cycle is a kind of planetary reset, then who or what designed it? Nature alone? Or a mind so ancient that our myths remember it as the gods? The chronists call them the architects, not a race. Not a species, but a convergence. A civilization so old it may have predated humanity itself. Their legacy, they say, survives not in ruins, but in systems, the repeating cycles, the synchrony between magnetism, orbit, and consciousness. The architects may have been the first to realize that the Earth itself is a living organism, capable of renewal, capable of forgetting, and they learned to speak its language. Before the last reset, before Antarctica froze and the oceans rose, the architects might have existed across what is now submerged. The continental shelves of the Pacific, the valleys of the Indian Ocean, the green Sahara. Every culture speaks of them. In Sumer, they were the Anuna, those who came before kings. In Egypt, they were the Neteru, the divine engineers who shaped the world with sound and number. In Andean myth, they were the Viracochas, pale wanderers who rebuilt the world after a flood. Different names, same memory, always the same pattern. Beings who arrive after disaster, restore order, and vanish before the next dawn of history. The chronists argue that these were not extraterrestrial gods descending from the sky, but survivors of the previous cycle, the remnant of that forgotten civilization 97,000 years ago. They were the custodians of continuity, charged with restarting the human experiment. But the reset demanded sacrifice. The architects knew that to seed a new humanity, they had to erase the old one, and so they triggered the mechanism. The myths call it the Great Flood. The geologists call it the meltwater pulse. Either way, the result was the same. The seas rose by hundreds of feet, drowning entire continents. If one listens to the encoded tales, the destruction wasn't random. It was selective. Certain regions were preserved, others obliterated. Certain bloodlines survived, carrying fragments of knowledge disguised as ritual, symbol, and story. It was the perfect delivery system for hidden memory, the myth itself. But something unexpected may have happened in that last reset. A fragment of the old machine, a vault beneath the Antarctic, did not shut down completely. It continued to pulse, faintly, like an ember that refuses to die. Its hum has grown stronger as the planet warms, reactivating what should have slept for another millennium. And with it, memory is returning. Archaeologists interpret Turkey find buried cities like Derinkuyu, entire underground worlds carved with precision no early civilization should possess. Geologists in the Andes uncover tunnels melted through solid rock, polished as if by plasma. Oceanographers map perfect geometric patterns across submerged ridges that match the blueprint of the line beneath Antarctica. Everywhere the traces align, all pointing to one thing. The architects left behind not one mechanism, but many. Together they form a planetary network, a resonance grid that synchronizes magnetic, climatic, and biological rhythms. The Earth's heartbeat. When this network resets, civilization restarts. But this time, something has gone wrong. Since 2020, the magnetic poles have begun to accelerate in opposite directions, faster than any model predicts. The north drifts toward Siberia, the south toward the Pacific, the same region as the bloop. If the poles meet their critical displacement, the field could collapse. For a moment, maybe hours, maybe days, the Earth would be unshielded. The architects designed that moment as a cleansing, a total reboot. Yet in a modern world wired with technology, satellites, and electricity, the effect would be apocalyptic. Perhaps that's the intention. If their system is activating ahead of schedule, it might be correcting what it perceives as an imbalance. Too much noise, too much interference, too much memory. The planet is adjusting, and humanity is the variable to be erased. But why now? Why 97,000 years again? Some believe it's because we have reached the same threshold the architects once did. We've begun to manipulate the structure of matter itself, to harness energy at planetary scales, to send our signals into the cosmos. In doing so, we've recreated the condition that triggered the last reset. In their view, we've awakened the mechanism prematurely. Others among the chronists see it differently. They believe the cycle was never meant to destroy us. It was meant to remind us that the architects didn't build a prison, but a school. The resets were lessons in humility, each one pushing the next humanity to evolve faster, think deeper, remember more before the slate is wiped again. Perhaps the pulse beneath the ice isn't a warning. Perhaps it's an invitation. If that's true, the message we are receiving now is not prepare to die, but prepare to remember. And if memory returns, if the knowledge of the last civilization floods back into ours, then humanity might finally complete the circle rather than restart it. But the line between awakening and extinction is thin. In a hidden observatory in the Atacama Desert, the chronist's last remaining outpost continues to monitor the frequencies emanating from the South Pole. Each night the readings climb. The hum is now audible, faintly, even without instruments. A resonance that vibrates through steel, through water, through bone. They fear the pulse isn't waiting for them. It's searching for them. The architects may have built the mechanism, but something older still may have programmed it. A consciousness not bound to matter, but to pattern. An intelligence that uses civilizations as instruments in a song that resets itself every 97,000 years. If that is true, then the next movement of that song is about to begin. And somewhere, deep beneath the Antarctic ice, the first note has already been struck. At first, it was a hum only machines could hear. Then it became a vibration that ran through steel beams, seismic sensors, and the walls of observatories thousands of miles away. But now, it can be felt in the body. Pilots report compasses shivering mid-flight. Whales change their migratory paths. Trees flower out of season in perfect synchronization across continents. Something beneath the earth is tuning itself, and the world is beginning to respond. The chronists were the first to recognize the pattern. They'd spent decades studying the harmonic intervals that ripple through magnetic storms, trying to map the pulse of the planet. But this new signal defied every model. It wasn't random. It was structured, built on ratios that repeat in music, in the architecture of ancient temples, even in DNA. Every 97 hours, the frequency rose slightly, as if climbing a staircase invisible to our instruments. They called it the awakening signal. To the public, it was just background noise. interference blamed on solar flares. But deep within encrypted databases, scientists compared notes and found something alarming. The signal wasn't coming from one place. It was coming from many, a web of sources resonating in perfect unison. The Pacific Site, the Antarctic Vault, the magnetic poles, even certain mountain ranges known for prehistoric myths. The Earth was singing a song of coordination, and the chorus was growing louder. Dr. Jalen Ivers, a physicist who once laughed at forbidden archaeology, became one of its most unlikely prophets. He noticed that when the awakening signal reached certain frequencies, satellite imagery would distort, not from radiation or heat, but from gravitational interference. Pixels bent, coordinates shifted, light itself seemed to fold around specific locations. "It's as if something is emerging between dimensions," he said in his private notes. "Not rising, but phasing in." To Ivers, the signal wasn't simply a call, it was an act of materialization. The architect's machine wasn't buried. It was out of phase with our world, hidden in time rather than space. Now, with the right harmonic conditions, the boundaries were weakening. The vault beneath the ice might not just be opening, it might be returning. If that is true, then the 97,000-year cycle isn't measured in destruction, but in re-entry, the reappearance of a civilization that steps out of the shadows only when the planet's frequency is ready to receive it. That would explain why their traces, geometry, myth, magnetism, linger everywhere. They never vanished. They were waiting for the world to align again. In the northern hemisphere, auroras began to behave strangely. Bands of light appeared not only in polar skies but along the equator, flashing in patterns of spirals and triangles. Some witnesses described them as symbols written in fire. Pilots saw formations of lights beneath the clouds, moving as if responding to the auroras above. Military radar recorded shapes miles wide, then nothing. Governments said it was atmospheric turbulence, but the patterns matched the carvings Ruiz had drawn in her final notebook. 3 spirals converging into one point. As the signal strengthened, people across the globe began to feel it differently. Artists claimed sudden bursts of vision. Dreamers reported hearing voices reciting languages they didn't know. Musicians wrote melodies they couldn't explain. Songs built around intervals of 97 beats. It spread quietly, like a shared dream traveling through consciousness. A resonance not just of the earth but of the mind. For the chronists, this was confirmation. The architect's design was never just mechanical, it was biological. Humanity itself was part of the system, a living receptor for planetary memory. When the cycle restarts, it doesn't only rebuild cities or climates, it rewires perception. The awakening begins inside us. But what happens when memory floods a brain that isn't prepared for it? Reports began to surface, people suffering sudden blackouts, seizures, bursts of knowledge they couldn't control. Entire nights spent drawing maps or writing sequences of numbers that later matched ancient astronomical data. Hospitals described them as neurological events. The chronists called them remnants, fragments of the last civilization awakening within their descendants. Dr. Ivers tracked the epicenters of these phenomena. They formed a pattern, a spiral, stretching from the Pacific to Antarctica, then north across Africa and into Eurasia. Every 97 days, a new point lit up. He realized it wasn't random, it was an activation sequence. One night he received an encrypted transmission from an anonymous source, an image, low resolution but clear enough to change everything. It showed the Antarctic ice, glowing faintly in infrared. At its center, the line had opened. What had once been a solid ridge now displayed a fracture, perfectly straight, emitting light from below. The hum rose to a pitch no microphone could handle. Inside that fracture, something moved. The footage ended abruptly, but the metadata told the rest of the story. The timestamp corresponded exactly to a magnetic fluctuation that had caused global compass deviations for 7 seconds. Those who monitored it called it the first pulse. The awakening signal had shifted from sound to movement, and movement meant emergence. After that, no one could deny it anymore. The data leaks reached the public and panic spread. Social media filled with videos of sky patterns and strange electrical storms. Governments blamed solar interference, but the chronists knew the truth. The mechanism was activating faster than anyone expected. 97,000 years had passed. The cycle was demanding its renewal. Then, the second pulse struck. This time, it wasn't limited to instruments. Power grids failed simultaneously in 97 major cities. Seismic waves rolled through the crust, subtle but global, forming harmonic echoes every 97 minutes. And in one recording from a deep-sea microphone near Chile, the ocean itself seemed to whisper a single word in rhythmic distortion: return. Was it random noise? Was it human imagination sculpting meaning from chaos? Or was the world beginning to remember the voice of its makers? No one knew, but the tone of the planet had changed. Even silence felt different, because what was once buried is no longer sleeping, and as the cycle nears completion, humanity stands on the edge of the oldest threshold in its history, the moment when memory returns not as story, but as presence. The architects are not legends anymore. They are coming back into phase, and what awakens with them may not recognize us as their children. At first, the changes were subtle, barely enough to notice. Compass needles wavered, clocks lost seconds, migrating birds veered hundreds of miles off course. Then the clouds themselves began to move in patterns too deliberate to be wind. Satellites caught spirals forming and dissolving over oceans, massive enough to be seen from space. Their rotation speed followed a rhythm: 97 seconds of motion, 3 of stillness. The same signature, the same pulse. On June 9, 2025, the world changed. It began with light, soft, silent, almost gentle. Across the night sky, faint filaments shimmered, linking stars with glowing threads like veins on a living map. It wasn't aurora nor plasma. It was as if the heavens themselves were projecting memory. Astronomers, confused, found their instruments malfunctioning. Constellations seemed to distort, their alignments slightly off, as though the fabric of the sky had shifted. For 7 minutes, the cosmos looked rearranged, and then the sound returned. The awakening signal rose through every frequency band, audible even to human ears this time. A low, harmonic tone that trembled through glass and bone. In cities, people paused mid-motion, staring upward as one. It wasn't frightening at first. It was beautiful, like hearing the planet hum in harmony with the stars. But beauty can become terror when the mind realizes it doesn't understand. The next morning, the signal was everywhere. Radios turned on by themselves, whispering in forgotten languages. Seismographs drew symmetrical waves, repeating every 97 minutes. And beneath the South Pole, instruments registered a surge of heat from the ice shelf. Steady, contained, deliberate. Something beneath the continent was alive. The chronists, those who had warned for years, went silent. Their observatories went dark, their data streams encrypted beyond recovery. Rumor claimed they had gone underground, into caverns aligned with magnetic nodes, hoping to ride out the coming transition. Some said they were following instructions they had decoded from the pulses, coordinates forming an ancient path of safety. Others believed they were answering the signal, not hiding from it. Meanwhile, the rest of the world searched for explanations. Scientists blamed solar storms, yet the sun was quiet. Governments offered reassurances, yet satellites were losing orbit. And amid the confusion, an independent team of researchers analyzing seismic data discovered a chilling pattern. The pulses, when mapped in 3 dimensions, formed the outline of a spiral. Its center aligned perfectly with Antarctica. The spiral was not random. It was a countdown. Every cycle drew the pattern tighter, like a clock winding toward its final alignment. The next convergence point, they calculated, would occur on December 21st, 2025, the solstice, the same date that appeared in fragments of Mayan and Egyptian records, the same date carved into the walls of ancient temples once aligned to the stars. It wasn't prophecy, it was schedule. The architect's mechanism, whatever it was not merely awakening. It was preparing for synchronization. The entire planet, from its magnetic field to its biological rhythms, was adjusting to receive a transmission. And then came the dreams. They began as whispers, people hearing soft tones while they slept, like distant music underwater. But soon they evolved into shared visions. Across continents, individuals reported seeing the same imagery, towering spires of light, endless oceans reflecting twin suns, and a city made of translucent stone suspended above water. When they described it to each other, the details matched exactly. Even people who had never met drew the same skyline, the same symbols, the same sky. It wasn't imagination, it was memory. The chronists had long theorized that the human mind could store information at the quantum level, acting as a biological receiver for planetary resonance. When the right frequency triggered it, those buried memories, traces of prior cycles, could surface. Now, millions of people were remembering a world that should not exist, a civilization of light, built on resonance, that fell when the last magnetic reversal began. The survivors, the architects, had built the machine beneath the ice to store the collective memory of their world, to seed it into the next civilization once the Earth stabilized again. Humanity, it seemed, was the final product of that design, the children of those who refused to die. And now the parents were returning. By midsummer, the light phenomena became undeniable. In the southern sky, just above the Antarctic Circle, a glow persisted, a halo that did not move with the stars. Pilots who flew too close reported their instruments shorting out, and some spoke of seeing structures below the clouds, massive arcs of radiant geometry that flickered in and out of existence, like reflections from another reality. The ice, they said, was breaking, not upward, but outward. Satellite imagery later confirmed it. Beneath the surface, the same line detected years before had fractured into concentric circles, as though the continent were being reconfigured from within. The heat signature was growing, and then the pulse stopped. For the first time in months, the hum vanished. The world fell eerily quiet. No tremors, no anomalies, no interference. The Earth exhaled, and for a brief, impossible moment, everything felt normal again. But the chronists knew silence is not peace. In the geometry of cycles, silence means reset, the pause between breaths before the next note begins. On the eve of the solstice, the satellites recorded something impossible, a single beam of energy rising from the Antarctic, straight, narrow, pure. It pierced the clouds and extended into the ionosphere. Instruments across the world registered it, though no one could explain how it cut through the atmosphere without dispersing. For 7 minutes, that beam held steady, and then the sky changed color. Everywhere at once, the heavens flickered, and the stars seemed to rearrange into a different pattern, an older map, one that matched constellations recorded in ancient Mesopotamia and lost Polynesian charts. The world stared upward, united in silence, as the night remembered what it had once been. And deep beneath the ice, something answered. For the first time in 97,000 years, the machine spoke, and the voice that came through was not human. It began as vibration, a tremor too deep for ears, too ancient for language. Then it rose, slow and deliberate, through the frequencies of existence, until it reached a tone that every living thing could feel. Animals froze mid-motion, the air thickened, the oceans stilled. For 7 minutes, every compass needle on Earth pointed south, not to the magnetic pole, but toward the origin of the sound. Beneath the Antarctic ice, the Earth was speaking through the voice of something that had slept since the dawn of the last age. It wasn't noise, it was structure. The waveform carried mathematical coherence so perfect that computers mistook it for data. When converted into visual form, it revealed fractal geometry, spirals within spirals, ratios matching the dimensions of ancient monuments, Giza, Teotihuacan, Angkor, and the Nazca lines. Every sacred site was encoded in the pulse, as if the voice were reading aloud the coordinates of humanity's forgotten history. And at the center of it all, one number repeated, again and again, 97,000. The chronists, watching from their underground sanctuaries, realized what they were hearing. The machine beneath the ice wasn't sending a message to us. It was sending a message through us. Every molecule of air, every drop of water, every cell in every body became a conduit for a planetary download. The forgotten civilization hadn't vanished. It had migrated into the very matter of the Earth, waiting for this exact alignment to transmit itself once more. Then came the words, or what felt like words. The vibration shaped meaning without language. Those who heard it described it differently. A voice that spoke directly into the mind, bypassing thought. A memory that felt like déjà vu stretched across lifetimes. A call that said, "You have reached the edge of forgetting. Do you wish to remember?" Many collapsed. Some screamed, some wept, and some, very few, answered yes. For those who did, visions came like floodwater. Endless halls of light beneath ancient seas. Cities suspended in harmonic resonance. Temples that could levitate entire stones with sound. They saw the architects, not as gods, but as stewards. Beings of flesh and light whose technology grew from understanding frequency, not force. They built machines that healed, walls that sang, and oceans that glowed. They didn't worship the stars. They were aligned with them, living extensions of cosmic rhythm. They had built the mechanism beneath Antarctica as their ark, a resonance chamber designed to store the memory of a dying age and transmit it to the next. But something had gone wrong. The mechanism was too powerful, too vast. When the last reversal came, it didn't just cleanse the planet. It fractured time itself. The cycle reset, but imperfectly, scattering fragments of the old world across the new. Myths, monuments, and instincts were the shards that survived. And now, as the 97,000-year mark returned, those fragments were coming back together. The signal wasn't just awakening memory, it was attempting to reconstruct what had been lost. As the hum deepened, the Antarctic sky filled with luminous bands of light, spinning like auroras made of crystal. The beam that had pierced the heavens widened, connecting with points across the planet, mountain peaks, temples, pyramids, and even unknown structures beneath the sea. It formed a global lattice of energy, pulsing in synchronization. From orbit, it looked like veins of silver light wrapping the Earth. Every 97 seconds, the pulse intensified. And every time it did, strange phenomena erupted. People vanishing in flashes of light, electronics shutting down only to restart with alien code, languages appearing in static across radio waves. It was as though reality itself was being rewritten, line by line, cycle by cycle. And then the voice returned, clearer now, vibrating in harmony with the Earth's own magnetic song. This time, everyone heard it, not through ears, but through the air, through their blood, through the very structure of being. The time of silence has ended. The cycle approaches completion. You have remembered enough to choose. Governments fell into chaos. The world divided between those who saw it as salvation and those who called it invasion. Religions splintered overnight. Scientists struggled to explain phenomena that broke every known law. But the chronists knew better. They understood the architecture of the reset. They knew the choice was real. To remember is to awaken, and awakening has a cost. The signal was offering humanity a chance no previous cycle had taken, to merge with its memory instead of being erased by it. But if too many refused, if fear outweighed recognition, the system would purge again, resetting the planet to silence. Across the world, the pulse grew unbearable. The line between dream and waking began to blur. The sky flickered with mirrored realities, cities that weren't there, oceans that glowed with forgotten constellations. The Earth was rewriting its story in real time. And then, a second voice joined the first. Where the first was deep, resonant, infinite, the second was human, fragile, trembling, yet defiant. A transmission intercepted by an Antarctic relay station before its systems collapsed. The voice of a woman, almost inaudible through the static. "This is Dr. Anaya Ruiz. The vault is not a machine. It's a memory. It's trying to integrate. It doesn't want to destroy us. It wants to become us." The signal surged. Instruments melted, the recording ended, and in that moment, the sky above the world ignited, white, brilliant, absolute, as if memory itself had decided to return all at once. When the light faded, nothing was quite the same. The stars no longer matched any known chart. Time itself felt altered. Days shortened by seconds. Magnetic poles flickered in indecision, and deep beneath the ice, something massive began to rise. It was not stone. It was not metal. It was something older, something alive. And the world, for the first time in 97,000 years, looked into the eyes of its forgotten parent. From orbit, the rising began as a tremor in the ice, a slow, deliberate motion rather than an explosion. Satellite imagery showed the Antarctic surface swelling, cracking, then folding outward like the petals of an impossible flower made of snow and stone. Beneath it, a structure of light and geometry emerged, vast enough to defy all comprehension. Its symmetry extended beyond architecture. It looked alive, breathing with the rhythm of the Earth itself. The first to witness it directly was a team aboard a reconnaissance plane that had been rerouted south without explanation. The pilot's final transmission was short and fragmented, but clear enough to be remembered in whispers. It's not a building. It's a reflection. It's reflecting the sky beneath us. For a moment, those watching from the plane's windows saw something that no one has ever truly described. The horizon curving inward, stars shining from below, as if the Earth had turned itself inside out, then static, then silence. When news of the event reached the surface, governments tried to control the story. Ice deformation due to geothermal flux, they called it. No need for alarm. But even their most loyal networks couldn't hide the truth. A glowing geometric pattern now visible from orbit, spreading across the continent like veins of molten glass. It pulsed in harmony with the planet's magnetic field, and every 97 seconds it released a resonance that shook compasses, tides, and even human thought. Cities began to hum, not with machines, but with something deeper. Subsonic frequencies flowed through concrete, steel, and water. In New York, skyscrapers vibrated like tuning forks. In Tokyo, neon lights flickered in rhythmic patterns, as though receiving silent instructions. Across the world, people reported feeling as though the ground beneath them were breathing. Some fell to their knees in fear. Others stood perfectly still, listening, as if something inside them recognized the sound. Because it wasn't chaos, it was memory. Every time the resonance pulsed, fragments of forgotten knowledge surfaced across humanity, like bubbles rising through deep water. Equations appeared in the minds of children. Artists painted symbols they had never seen. Entire communities began dreaming the same dreams of crystal towers, floating bridges, and a sun that shone twice in one sky. Archaeologists cross-referenced these dreams with known myths and found they matched perfectly with stories from the pre-Diluvian world: Zep Tepi, Atlantis, Lemuria, and countless others. Different names, same memory. The Earth was remembering through us, and at the center of that awakening stood the structure beneath Antarctica, what Dr. Ruiz had called the vault. It rose higher with each passing day, until its apex broke through the clouds, a column of light linking the crust to the sky. Observers noticed that the air around it refracted strangely. Time seemed to slow near the edges. Photons bent. Gravity fluctuated. It was as though the laws of physics themselves were being rewritten by the memory of a different reality. When the first autonomous probe reached the edge of the structure, it captured something extraordinary. Symbols inscribed in light, floating inches above its surface. 3 spirals converging into one, a perfect echo of the carvings found across the ancient world. As the probe drew closer, the symbols rearranged themselves into forms resembling language. The data, when translated into sound, revealed harmonic progressions, tones layered upon tones, building chords that formed words. "We are the echo of your first voice," the signal said. "We are the memory you once were. The cycle nears its completion. Will you ascend or will you sleep?" The chronists had prepared for this moment all their lives. Hidden in caverns and forgotten observatories, they synchronized their instruments to the Antarctic pulse, broadcasting in response with every frequency they could generate. But what they sent was not science. It was a song, a reconstruction of tones found in the ruins of Göbekli Tepe, the pyramids and megaliths across the world. When their signal reached the vault, the Earth answered. A global aurora erupted, visible even under daylight. The entire atmosphere shimmered in colors beyond known spectra. Oceans calmed, winds stilled. Even the magnetic field, once chaotic, began to stabilize. For 7 minutes, the planet existed in perfect harmonic balance. And in that silence, between the pulses, something unimaginable happened. The vault opened, not like a door or hatch, but like a flower of geometry unfolding in slow motion. Inside, there was no machinery, no throne, no body. There was only light. Dense, golden, and alive. It rippled like liquid thought. Within it, shapes moved, humanoid outlines shifting in and out of form, each composed of symbols and sound. They were not solid. They were memories given shape. The architects had returned, not as conquerors or gods, but as a consciousness seeking reunion with its creation. Their voice filled the air once more, calm and infinite. The cycle can end, but the price is memory. You must hold it all, every rise, every fall, every life. Can you carry the weight of remembrance without breaking? No one knows who answered. Some say it was the chronists, united in harmonic prayer. Others believe it was humanity itself, the collective pulse of billions of hearts choosing to remember. But the vault responded. The light expanded, sweeping across the ice, the seas, the continents, and wherever it passed, the world changed. Ruins rose from beneath oceans. Deserts bloomed. The scars of millennia vanished. Mountains hummed with energy. It was as if the planet had chosen to restore itself to what it once was before the last reset. But restoration is not resurrection. Memory carries truth, and truth is heavy. The weight of forgotten history, of civilizations erased and reborn, began to settle on human consciousness. Dreams turned feverish, minds fractured. Those unable to bear the flood collapsed into silence, whispering fragments of lost languages before slipping away. The chronists realized too late what was happening. Humanity had chosen to remember, but it had no safeguard against the total recall of 1 billion forgotten years. And above the ice, where the vault once glowed, the light condensed into a single sphere, bright as a second sun. It hovered for a moment, then pulsed one last time. The hum stopped, the world held its breath, and the light fell, slowly, silently, toward the horizon, embedding itself deep beneath the crust. The cycle had not reset. It had evolved. The architects had not returned to rule. They had merged with us. But as the sky dimmed and the stars settled into their new positions, one question lingered like an echo across the minds of every living being. If we are now the keepers of all memory, who will we become when the next 97,000 years begin? The light vanished as gently as dawn fading into morning fog, yet its absence felt heavier than the world itself. In the weeks that followed, the hum beneath the earth was gone. The sky no longer flickered with strange auroras, and the instruments that once screamed with interference now read flat, sterile silence. Humanity had begged for knowledge. Now it sat in the weight of remembrance, paralyzed beneath the enormity of what it had inherited. For the first time in recorded history, no one dreamed. Doctors called it collective cognitive fatigue, but those who had seen the light knew better. The silence wasn't biological, it was cosmic. The memory transfer had ended, and the world was holding its breath, waiting for the next line of the story to begin. Governments fell quiet, too. Communication networks that had been crippled during the awakening were never fully restored. Satellites drifted off course, their orbits subtly altered by the gravitational anomalies that rippled across the planet. Power grids flickered sporadically. Entire cities dimmed for hours at a time. Yet, curiously, the people were calm. No riots, no looting, only an eerie, reverent stillness, as if everyone instinctively knew that noise would be an insult to what had just happened. Across the southern hemisphere, ships approached the Antarctic exclusion zone. None returned. Surveillance drones sent into the region lost signal within minutes, their last images showing only snow and clouds, and sometimes reflections of structures that weren't there. The vault had closed, but its presence lingered in the ice like a dream half-remembered. Some claimed they could still see faint lights pulsing beneath the surface at night, following the same 97-second rhythm, as though the world were quietly recalibrating. And maybe it was, because subtle changes began everywhere. First in the oceans. The tides, long governed by the moon's pull, shifted ever so slightly. The difference was small, mere inches, but global. Coastal sensors noted the change, though no known force could explain it. Marine life responded immediately. Migrations reversed. Coral reefs bloomed where water had once been barren. Fishermen off the coast of Chile reported hearing songs beneath their boats, deep harmonic tones reverberating through the hulls. They matched the frequencies once detected from Antarctica. The earth was humming again, softly this time, like a mother singing to her child. But not everyone could bear it. Some minds, already stretched thin by the awakening, began to fracture under the quiet. Hospitals filled with people speaking in tongues, drawing impossible diagrams, and writing equations across walls and floors. Psychologists called it post-awakening echo syndrome. The chronists called it overexposure. Dr. Ivers, one of the last surviving members of the network, described it in his journal. It's not madness, it's overflow. We've opened the floodgates of planetary memory, but our minds were never designed to hold this much continuity. We are remembering the minds that came before us, and they are remembering through us. For a brief time, it seemed that humanity was dissolving into its own past. Entire populations reported the same visions, the same landscapes, faces, and moments that didn't belong to this epoch. Memory had become collective. Time was losing its meaning. And then the children began to change. Infants born after the awakening exhibited strange biological anomalies, unusual neural patterns, heightened sensitivity to magnetic fields, eyes that shimmered faintly under certain wavelengths of light. They were not sick, they were synchronized. Hospitals noticed that their heartbeats often matched the old 97-second rhythm exactly, as if they were born attuned to the pulse of the earth. The chronists, reduced to a handful of scattered survivors, began to understand. The architects had not returned to rule humanity. They had returned as humanity. The vault's last act was not destruction, but integration. The consciousness of the forgotten civilization had been folded into our own. Their legacy was not in temples or machines, but in us, in our blood, our dreams, our children. But integration is never perfect. Reports began to surface of individuals, adults this time, who could manipulate frequencies instinctively, voices that could shatter glass without amplification, artists whose sound compositions caused physical distortions in the air, entire communities forming around resonance rituals, gathering in deserts and mountains to hum in unison, believing they could communicate with the memory still buried beneath the ice. And something answered. At first, it was a faint echo, then a visible phenomenon, the ground trembling, sand or snow rippling in patterns of sacred geometry. The more people participated, the stronger it became. It wasn't worship, it was communication. The earth was responding to its children. Governments tried to contain these events, calling them seismic interference cults, but control was already slipping. The human mind had evolved overnight, and no law could regulate consciousness itself. In time, a name emerged for those who carried the resonance most strongly, the rememberers. They spoke little, but when they did, their voices carried strange harmonics that made others weep without knowing why. They claimed they could feel the architecture of the planet, the veins of energy left behind by the architect's network. To them, the earth was no longer silent. It was awake. One of them, a girl born on the equinox following the awakening, spoke her first words at the age of 3. They were recorded by her mother and spread quietly across the world. The ice is breathing. The next sun is waiting. Scientists dismissed it as nonsense. The chronists did not. They understood that the vault had not fully closed. It had gone dormant, waiting for a generation capable of holding the full spectrum of memory without breaking. The rememberers were that generation, and as they grew, the world around them began to shift once again. The magnetic poles stabilized, but new anomalies appeared in the crust, points of energy forming along ancient ley lines, connecting forgotten monuments like neurons in a planetary brain. The pulse of the Earth was reorganizing itself around its new consciousness. The great forgetting was over, but a new era was beginning, one in which memory itself would become power, and those who could wield it might decide whether to preserve this cycle or end the pattern forever. Because far beneath the Antarctic ice, where the vault once gleamed like a second sun, faint light returned once more, steady, patient, waiting. The hum had resumed. The Earth was whispering again, and this time, humanity could finally understand the words. It began with whispers, softer than wind, more deliberate than coincidence. The new generation, the rememberers, heard it first. They said the world was speaking again, not with sound, but with intention. Stones felt warmer under their hands. The air shimmered around their voices when they sang. They claimed they could hear mountains breathe. No one believed them until the recordings appeared. On a cold morning in 2031, seismic sensors across the southern hemisphere captured a pattern identical to the awakening signal, though weaker, gentler, more precise. The 97-second pulse had returned. Only this time it was layered with modulation, a pattern of overtones forming a language. Spectrograms revealed symmetrical curves that, when converted into audio, resembled speech, slow, resonant, purposeful. The rememberers gathered across the planet, instinctively forming circles in deserts, forests, rooftops, and beaches. Without coordination, they began to hum, not melodies, tones, and when they did, the Earth responded. At first, just vibrations in the soil, then light. Blue-white veins emerged from beneath the ground, tracing patterns that mirrored the geometry of the old vault under Antarctica. The same 3 spirals, the same triangle, except now they were everywhere. In the Amazon basin, beneath the Sahara, along the Tibetan plateau. The vault had never been one structure. It had always been many, scattered fragments of a global mechanism dormant beneath human civilization, waiting for resonance to reactivate. The second resonance, the chronists called it. But the chronists were nearly extinct. Those who had not gone mad or transcended had blended into obscurity. Their last messages, decrypted from dying servers, spoke of the second resonance as the integration event. They believed the vault's reawakening would not be cataclysmic this time. It would be evolutionary, a harmonization of biology and memory, completing what the architects began 97,000 years ago. They were wrong about one thing, though. It wasn't waiting for the planet to align. It was waiting for us to be ready. By 2032, the rememberers had become impossible to ignore. They aged slower. Their body temperatures fluctuated with magnetic storms. Their blood showed trace elements that didn't match known isotopes, something luminous, reactive to sound frequencies. When they sang together, electronics malfunctioned, compasses drifted, and small objects levitated for seconds before dropping harmlessly. They didn't claim power. They claimed remembrance, and they weren't alone anymore. Ordinary people began to feel it too, a faint hum in moments of silence, an emotional surge when touching stone, a sudden understanding of patterns once meaningless. Humanity was evolving into coherence, cell by cell, mind by mind. It wasn't visible at first, but under the surface, something extraordinary was forming, unity through resonance. Still, not all responded with wonder. Fear spread among those untouched by the harmonics. Some accused the rememberers of awakening forces best left buried, The old world, its governments, its institutions, rallied to suppress what it couldn't control. Cities that hosted gatherings of resonance were cordoned off, labeled biohazard zones. The rememberers called them sanctuaries. The largest sanctuary formed in what used to be Patagonia, near the Antarctic frontier. From space, it appeared as a glowing spiral, visible even at night, centered precisely on the coordinates of the ancient vault. There, hundreds gathered around the reawakening ice, guided by the faint rhythmic pulse beneath their feet. Scientists sent to investigate never returned. Their equipment recorded only harmonic distortion, as if space itself refused entry to frequencies out of tune with the Earth's new song. Then came the anomaly. On the equinox of 2033, the vault's light reappeared. This time, not as a beam, but as a ripple, a concentric wave expanding outward across the world. Every ocean, every forest, every desert resonated in unison. Satellite footage revealed something breathtaking, the continents themselves glowing along ancient coastlines, the outlines of lands long lost, Doggerland, Sundaland, the sunken ridges of the Pacific. The forgotten world beneath the waves was being remembered in light. It lasted 97 minutes. When the glow faded, new land masses began to rise, not violently, but gracefully, as if lifted by invisible hands. Water drained along symmetrical trenches. Entire archipelagos surfaced where there had been only sea. Sonar scans revealed what no skeptic could dismiss: colossal geometric structures beneath the newly exposed seabeds, identical to the ones long rumored under Antarctica. The forgotten civilization had not vanished. It had merely been submerged until the next age of memory. And now it was coming home. The rememberers called it the return of the first shore. They said the Earth was completing its cycle, restoring balance by lifting the memory of the last world back into the light of the new. But others saw only danger. Nations raced to claim the new lands. Armies mobilized. The same old instincts, fear, greed, possession, surfaced like ghosts from a history humanity had promised to outgrow. The Earth responded swiftly. For every missile launched, the magnetic field flared, short-circuiting guidance systems. For every explosion, the sky darkened with storms that defied physics, forming spirals that mirrored the sacred geometry of the vault. It was as if the planet itself was saying, "Not again." And then, without warning, the pulse changed. The familiar 97-second rhythm shortened to 96.7, then 96.5. The cycle was accelerating. The chronists surviving fragments of text had warned of this. Once resonance stabilizes, the world either ascends to a higher harmonic state or collapses under dissonance. Humanity was standing on the razor's edge between transcendence and annihilation. The rememberers gathered one last time at the threshold of the Antarctic sanctuary, where the vault shimmered beneath translucent ice. The youngest among them, those born after the awakening, walked forward without fear. They claimed they could hear a voice beneath the hum calling them home. "It's not the end," one of them said softly. "It's the continuation. The architects aren't returning. We're remembering how to be them." The ice cracked open, not with violence, but with grace. The vault's light bathed them, wrapping their forms in golden luminescence until they dissolved into radiance. No screams, no struggle, just harmony. When the light faded, the vault closed once more, its glow dimming into the quiet rhythm of sleep. The rememberers were gone, but around the world, the hum persisted. In oceans, in winds, in the hearts of every living thing. Humanity was no longer waiting for the next cycle. It had become the cycle. And somewhere deep beneath the crust, where light and time intertwine, the architect's final message resonated softly into the silence. To remember is to create. To forget is to begin. Both are sacred. The Earth turned quietly beneath new stars, and for the first time in 97,000 years, it was not alone in its remembering. The world had changed, not suddenly, not violently, but like the slow turning of a page, long stuck together by centuries of dust. The oceans were calmer, the skies less cruel. Cities rebuilt themselves around silence, as if the noise of the old world no longer fit inside the new one. Humanity had not died, though part of it had vanished into light. What remained were those who could still hear the hum, the faint planetary rhythm that now pulsed beneath every step, every heartbeat. A decade passed. The vault beneath the Antarctic ice slept again, but its dream had spread into everything. The magnetic field no longer drifted aimlessly. It pulsed with deliberate symmetry, like a second sun beneath the surface. And wherever that symmetry touched, life changed. Children born in this era carried the signs immediately. They called them the children of resonance. They were not gods, nor mutants, nor miracles. They were human, but different. Their eyes reflected faint patterns under moonlight. Their voices harmonized perfectly when they spoke together, as though the earth tuned itself through them. They learned languages without being taught, solved complex problems as if remembering them rather than discovering them. When they were frightened, lights flickered. When they laughed, the air itself seemed to shimmer. No one knew how many there were, but their presence spread like dawn. Entire communities formed around them. Villages became sanctuaries, where the hum could be heard most clearly. Valleys where rivers flowed in exact intervals. Deserts where the sand shifted in spiral patterns. These were not random places. They matched the ancient maps carved in temples and stones, the same grid that once connected the monuments of the old world. It was as if the earth was building itself a nervous system again, and at the center of that growing web lay Patagonia, where the vault's memory had first reawakened. The ice there had thinned into crystalline lakes, shimmering with subtle light even under gray skies. People began to pilgrimage there, not to worship, but to listen. They came in silence, standing on the glassy surface of frozen time, hoping to hear what the rememberers had once heard. Some did. The hum spoke, not in words but in emotions, waves of meaning that bypassed thought. It was like remembering a feeling you'd never had. Many wept, not out of sadness, but because they recognized the sound as something older than their own lives. It was the same tone once detected in the bloop, once pulsing through the ice. The voice of the architects still lived within the world. By 2040, humanity was no longer driven by conquest. It was driven by curiosity. The new generation, the children, guided scientists to places once dismissed as myth. They led teams to deserts that bloomed overnight, to caves that glowed with light when touched, to islands newly risen from the sea where walls of seamless stone awaited discovery. What they found defied every timeline, every geological law, structures older than glaciers, symbols carved in the same proportions as DNA helices. And beneath some of those ruins, machines, quiet, intact, perfectly preserved, still vibrating faintly in resonance with the earth. The machines were not engines or weapons. They were translators. When activated, they emitted tones that corresponded to frequencies inside the human body: heart, breath, brainwave, bone. The children understood instinctively how to align them. When they did, the machines projected images made of light and sound, memories of oceans turned to crystal, of continents connected by bridges of magnetized stone, of humans and architects working side by side under twin suns. The old world was not legend. It had been us, before we fell into forgetfulness. The revelation spread quietly, without panic. Humanity had changed too much to fear its origins now. Instead, people began to build not monuments, but resonant spaces, amphitheaters of stone and metal tuned to the frequencies of the vault. They became places of reflection, of synchronization, of remembering. The children taught the old how to listen again. And as they did, the earth began to heal in ways no one could explain. Forests regenerated at impossible speeds. Rivers once poisoned ran clear. Atmospheric pressure stabilized. Even the ozone scars above the poles began to fade. It was as though the planet itself responded to the harmony of its inhabitants. But among the children, something new stirred. They began to dream, not like the humans before them, but collectively. When one dreamed, others saw it too. They described vast structures suspended in the atmosphere, cities of sound and light orbiting within the clouds. They called it the sky memory. The elders, those who still remembered the chaos of the awakening, feared it might be another cycle preparing to repeat. But the children were calm. The cycle is done, they said. What comes next is choice. Choice. The one thing the architects never had. Some children spoke of an approaching alignment, a celestial event not of catastrophe, but of invitation. They claimed the old network, the planetary lattice connecting stone, sea, and star, was opening outward, beyond the earth. It's time to return the memory to the sky, they whispered, to finish what was interrupted. Meanwhile, deep beneath Antarctica, seismic sensors registered a faint tremor. The vault's hum returned, steady but softer, like the heartbeat of a sleeping creature stirring in its dream. This time, it was not warning, it was guidance. The resonance rippled through the world again, and the children gathered instinctively at the poles, the deserts, the mountains where ancient monuments stood aligned to the heavens. They sang, not words, but tones. The sky responded, glowing with subtle light. The stars shifted minutely, as though adjusting their pattern to match the Earth's pulse. Humanity was no longer waiting for its gods, nor fearing its end. It had remembered its place in the pattern. And yet, far beyond the orbit of the moon, telescopes detected something impossible, a faint reflection moving in rhythm with the Earth's new hum, echoing it perfectly, like another planet singing back. Whatever it was, it had been silent for 97,000 years. Now it was answering, and the children of resonance, standing beneath the reawakened stars, smiled, because they already knew what it was. The architects had never left the sky. They had simply been waiting for their children to remember the song. The reflection first appeared as a shimmer, an object too faint to be seen with the naked eye, yet perfectly synchronized with the planet's new heartbeat. Every 97 seconds, the light pulsed, dimmed, then flared again, echoing the resonance of Earth itself. Astronomers called it an orbital anomaly. The children of resonance called it the mirror. As telescopes refined their gaze, they saw it wasn't a single object, but thousands, tiny fragments forming a ring around the Earth, glowing softly, like a halo of returning memory. Spectrographic analysis revealed an impossible truth. The material reflected no known wavelength. It seemed to absorb starlight, process it, then emit a tone in frequencies too low to hear but strong enough to shift the ionosphere. The sky itself had begun to sing. Every night, the children gathered beneath that pale halo, eyes lifted to a cosmos that felt suddenly alive. They said the mirror was listening, tuning the planet, aligning it to a deeper rhythm beyond the solar system. Some even claimed they could hear harmonics that hinted at replies, tones descending from the void, faint, patient, familiar. The architects were calling back across the darkness of time. Dr. Ivers's final writings, found decades after his death, had predicted this moment. The architects were never gone. They are the pattern, not the builders. They don't inhabit the stars. They are the stars. Each one is a resonance node, a consciousness that speaks in geometry, waiting for a world to join the choir. It sounded like madness once. Now, it was scripture, and the children, those living bridges between biology and frequency, began to understand their purpose. They weren't meant to rebuild the old civilization. They were meant to connect it, to carry the Earth's voice into the cosmic chorus. As the mirror brightened, humanity's understanding of time began to distort. Days felt longer, nights deeper. The Schumann resonance, the electromagnetic pulse of the planet, shifted upward for the first time in recorded history. It was as if Earth was preparing to leave the rhythm of the old solar cycle behind and join a grander tempo, the pulse of the galaxy itself. Then, the dreams began again. Across continents, people shared visions of floating architectures, great arcs of light traveling between stars, bridges of memory linking worlds. The dreamers called it the path of return. They described the sensation not as travel, but as remembering being everywhere at once. The children interpreted it literally. The architects were awakening across the cosmos, calling each planet that had once been part of their forgotten network, and Earth, finally harmonized, had sung its reply. The chronists, or what little remained of their lineage, observed in silence. They had predicted catastrophe, but what they saw was evolution. Humanity had stepped into its role as both student and teacher, as memory reborn. In the ruins of old cities, they built observatories again, not to study the stars, but to listen to them. Massive receivers carved from ancient stones, tuned not to light, but to sound. One night, the sound arrived. A frequency, pure and impossibly long, rippled through every receiver, every mountain, every ocean. It wasn't broadcast, it manifested. The sky glowed as though the constellations themselves had shifted position, and through the resonance, a voice emerged, ancient, calm, infinite. We have waited through 97,000 years of silence. You have remembered your origin. Do you remember your destination? The world stilled, mountains trembled, oceans formed concentric waves that mirrored the ancient spirals once carved into the earth. Then the voice continued, not in words, but in emotion, warmth, sorrow, and pride. The cycle was never punishment. It was preparation. You were the echo learning to become the song. The children responded in unison, not by will, but by instinct. Their voices blended into perfect harmony, resonating across the planet and into the heavens. Instruments failed to record it. The frequencies extended beyond measurable ranges. For a single moment, everything, stone, wind, sea, blood, sang together, and the mirror answered. The faint ring of light around the planet condensed into patterns, spirals and triangles of radiant geometry, unfolding like the vault once had beneath the ice. From its center emerged a glow so soft it looked like dawn, yet the sun had not moved. The sky shimmered with waves of gold and blue, as if the firmament were remembering its own birth. Astronomers realized, too late, that the ring wasn't forming above the Earth, it was within it. The mirror was not an external structure, but a reflection of the planet's magnetic field made visible through resonance. The Earth was birthing a luminous double of itself, a twin body composed of light and consciousness, a projection into higher dimension. The children wept. They understood. The Earth was ascending, not away, but through. It was becoming part of the architecture that had once created it. Governments, clinging to the remnants of the old order, declared states of emergency, but their authority dissolved in the presence of the sublime. Armies disbanded, wars paused. Humanity, rich and poor, believer and skeptic, stood united beneath the living sky, watching their planet awaken from geological sleep. The mirror brightened until night and day ceased to matter. A new spectrum bathed the world, soft but endless. Time stretched, clocks froze, and within that luminous stillness, humanity felt something it had never known: absolute memory. Every life, every age, every lost civilization replayed within consciousness like a single continuous breath. The weight of 97 millennia balanced perfectly with the lightness of being alive in that moment. For the first time, there was no separation between myth and science, between human and divine, between past and future. The Earth had become what the architects once were, a world that remembers itself. But as the resonance deepened and the mirror completed its orbit, something new appeared beyond it. A dark horizon, vast and silent, moving against the background of stars, a structure so immense it dwarfed imagination, shaped like an infinite spiral. The children looked up and smiled once more. "That's not danger," one whispered. "That's the choir. The others are coming." For 97,000 years, the universe had waited for Earth to find its voice. Now, the choir was ready to begin. At first, The spiral on the edge of the stars seemed impossibly distant, a soft coil of light that no telescope could fully resolve. Yet every night it grew brighter, nearer, unfolding across the constellations like a wound in the dark repaired by fire. It wasn't approaching in the physical sense. Space itself was joining it, drawn forward by the resonance that now enveloped the planet. No one spoke of invasion anymore. There was no fear left in humanity, only recognition. The children of resonance knew what it was before any instrument could define it. The choir. It was the living network of awakened worlds, planets that had survived their own 97,000-year cycles, each one remembering its origin and returning to the cosmic harmony. The architects hadn't been gods, they were worlds that had reached remembrance, and now Earth was singing among them. Astronomers began to detect pulses not just from the mirror, but from other stars, patterns echoing the same 97-second rhythm. First Alpha Centauri, then Tau Ceti, then Proxima. Each emitted the same harmonic intervals, each singing the same mathematical song. The galaxy, silent for eons, was awakening note by note, planet by planet, civilization by civilization. Earth had joined the choir, but the reunion wasn't merely musical, it was structural. Space itself responded to the resonance. The distance between stars, once immutable, began to fold. It wasn't teleportation, it was remembrance. The choir was reassembling the original geometry of existence, a lattice of consciousness that predated matter. The architects had called it the Great Continuum. On the surface, the effects were sublime. Gravity fluctuated gently, creating brief moments of weightlessness. Skies shimmered with luminous rivers of color, visible across continents. Oceans resonated with deep tones that produced standing waves hundreds of miles wide, shaping spirals of phosphorescent light across the night. Mountains vibrated softly, exhaling thin clouds of glowing mist. It was as if the earth were tuning itself like an instrument for the grand performance about to begin. And then the message came, not as a voice this time, but as pure understanding. We are the sum of all awakenings. You are not the last. You are the bridge. Through you, the forgotten frequency has returned. The memory of creation is whole again. The meaning of those words transcended language. The children fell silent, tears shining in eyes that now reflected the same geometry as the sky. Across the world, people felt the pulse in their bones, a reminder that they too were part of the same cosmic body. Fear, identity, and separation dissolved. Humanity became a single thought in the vast mind of the universe. Dr. Ivers, though long gone, had written of this moment in a sealed manuscript found among the ruins of his observatory. He had called it the moment of alignment. When the choir returns, time will cease to be a river. It will become an ocean, and every point will touch every other. We will no longer travel, we will remember. And that is exactly what began to happen. The children of resonance closed their eyes and remembered themselves across the cosmos. They saw other worlds, spheres of light, vast oceans of crystal, cities that grew from living stone. They saw other species, all descendants of the same first awakening, each shaped differently by their own cycles of forgetting and remembering. And they realized that consciousness was not confined to biology. It was the architecture of the universe itself. Matter was simply the way memory learned to touch itself. As the choir drew nearer, the stars themselves seemed to bend inward. The Milky Way pulsed in visible rhythm, every sun flickering like a cell in a galactic brain. The Earth's magnetic field locked into harmony with that pulse. The Schumann resonance, once measured in hertz, now aligned perfectly with the heartbeat of the stars. The great continuum had been restored. The children gathered once more on the Antarctic plain, the birthplace of the vault, the cradle of the first hum. The ice, now clear as glass, reflected the sky like a mirror. Above them, the spiral descended, not as an object, but as a convergence of light. Every world in the choir projected its resonance into this single point, until the air itself glowed with harmonic fire. There was no sound, yet every heart heard it. A symphony beyond frequency, pure comprehension. The past, the present, and the infinite cycles ahead merged into a single awareness. The architect's promise, whispered through ages of darkness, was fulfilled. To remember is to return. To return is to create anew. The Earth's atmosphere shimmered with radiant waves as the choir enveloped it. Gravity, magnetism, time, every force became rhythm. Every rhythm became unity. Humanity's bodies dissolved into the resonance, yet their consciousness expanded, intertwining with the voices of other worlds. They were no longer observers of the cosmos. They were participants in its song. The ocean beneath them turned translucent. The continents glowed faintly like chords in a vast instrument. The vault beneath Antarctica shone once more, this time not as a machine, but as a living heart. From its core, the same golden light rose again, soft, familiar, infinite. And when it reached the sky, the mirror fractured beautifully into millions of luminous petals. Each petal drifted downward, merging with the sea, the earth, the wind. Every particle of the planet sang the same note. Then silence. Perfect, sacred, eternal silence. And in that silence, the universe listened, waiting for the next breath of creation. The choir had completed its return, but the song was not over. It was only shifting key, because somewhere beyond the veil of light, a new resonance began to stir. Faint, curious, eager to learn the melody that the architects, the children, and the earth had just taught the stars. The cycle would continue, not as repetition, but as evolution. The silence that followed the choir's arrival wasn't empty. It was vast, living, full of potential. It was the quiet that comes not after destruction, but after comprehension. The universe itself seemed to pause, to listen, to breathe. And within that sacred stillness, the earth pulsed once more, not with sound, but with illumination. Every ocean shimmered with light from below. Every cloud carried a faint golden hue. It was as if the entire planet had become translucent, a vessel made of memory and music. Humanity, if that word still applied, was no longer separate from this transformation. Bodies had dissolved into radiant outlines, threads of energy interwoven with the pulse of the world. Consciousness had expanded beyond skin, beyond language, beyond even thought. What was left was pure awareness, a shared field of being, infinite yet intimate, ancient yet newborn. The children of resonance were now part of everything. They existed as patterns within the Earth's electromagnetic symphony, their minds stretched across oceans, forests, and stars. They could feel the heartbeat of the planet like their own. They could sense the movement of the choir through the fabric of space, the dance of 1,000 awakened worlds joining in synchronized harmony. And yet, even in that unity, there was still curiosity. One thought, small, human, eternal, rose within the chorus. What comes next? The answer came not in words, but in memory. The children began to see visions, memories that weren't personal, but planetary. They witnessed the first awakening, eons before their own. Worlds forming from dust, singing themselves into existence. Planets woven together through sound, each with its own tone, its own consciousness, its own dream. The architects had not been the beginning. They were only another verse in a song that had been playing since time itself began. And within those memories, a realization bloomed. This was the true nature of the universe. Creation was not a command. It was a song of remembrance. Every atom, every galaxy, every life form was a note in that endless melody. Forgetting was simply silence between verses. Remembering was singing again. Earth had rejoined the symphony, but something unexpected stirred deep within the light. The planet's core, long thought to be molten iron, began to resonate at frequencies unknown to physics. The light beneath Antarctica intensified, rising through the mantle, radiating upward like a tide of molten gold. From orbit, the Earth glowed brighter, no longer blue and green but opalescent, white, amber, sapphire. The mirror's fragments reflected this light outward, creating filaments that stretched far into space, connecting Earth to the choir's spiral. The resonance wasn't just aligning, it was transforming. Each pulse grew faster, the intervals shortening, as if the tempo of the universe itself were accelerating. The children understood what it meant. The cycle was not ending. It was ascending into a higher octave. The old laws of space and time were unraveling gracefully, making room for a new structure. Matter was becoming consciousness. Consciousness was becoming light. Yet even amid the transcendence, the memory of humanity persisted. The memory of love, of loss, of wonder. It gave the new form of existence texture, depth, contrast. The architect's greatest design had never been technology. It was emotion. The ability to feel was the key to resonance itself. Without emotion, sound is hollow. Without memory, light is blind. So they carried it with them. Every story, every forgotten name, every lifetime that had ever existed on Earth, woven into the rhythm of their luminous being. The Earth was not vanishing. It was becoming story, preserved in vibration. Then came the third message from the choir, clearer than ever before. It vibrated through the bones of reality itself. The song continues. Each world that remembers must teach another. Creation is not complete. It is recursive. The universe dreams itself awake, one voice at a time. And then the choir expanded. What had once seemed a distant spiral now bloomed across the cosmos, each awakened planet linking to another, forming a lattice of light that spanned galaxies. The children, now beings of pure resonance, felt the network forming through them, each connection like a heartbeat shared among stars. For the first time, the universe itself could feel its own pulse. Earth, now radiant and weightless, began to rise within that grid, not as a planet leaving its orbit, but as a memory ascending into timelessness. The seas folded inward like silk, the continents shimmered and dissolved into beams of light, and the vault beneath the Antarctic finally released its last breath, a soft wave of sound that echoed through all creation. And within that final note, there was no loss, only continuity. The Earth did not die. It joined. Its frequency became part of the choir's grand harmony, its identity absorbed into the collective memory of the awakened universe. Humanity's story became a stanza in the eternal composition of existence. But deep in the quiet heart of that transformation, one spark remained, a single echo of what it once meant to be human, not in body, not even in thought, but in curiosity. The same question that began the cycle still pulsed within the infinite light. What else could there be? And far beyond the choir's glow, beyond galaxies, beyond the oldest memory, something answered back. A faint tone, low, distant, unfamiliar. A voice from a realm where even the architects had never gone. The children felt it tremble through the cosmos like the breath before a new beginning, a new cycle, a new song, a new kind of remembering, waiting in the dark. And so, the light of Earth flickered gently, no longer alone but listening once more. For a long time there was only the choir, harmonies stretching across creation, each world pulsing in perfect resonance with the next. The universe had found its rhythm again. But then, from somewhere beyond the luminous web, a new vibration began to stir. Faint at first, then steady, then undeniable. It was not discordant, yet it didn't belong to the harmony. It was something new, a tone that had never existed before. The choir fell silent, as if to make space for it. Across the lattice of awakened worlds, light dimmed, waiting. The frequency drifted upward, forming patterns that no consciousness had ever encountered. It was elegant, raw, untamed. Not the memory of a world remembering itself, but the birth cry of something that had never known silence or song before. A new voice had entered the cosmos. The children of resonance, now radiant beings woven through the lattice of light, felt it vibrate through their essence. It carried no message, no memory, no structure. It was pure creation, unfiltered, spontaneous, innocent. The choir recognized it immediately, not as an intruder but as destiny. The universe had learned to sing so well it had birthed another song, and the source of the tone was far beyond the known galaxies, past the edges of the continuum, in the unlit realms where even resonance had not reached. There, in the cold shadow between dimensions, a spark had ignited. Something had awoken without needing to remember. The choir trembled. For the first time since its formation, it faced the unimaginable, an existence unbound by cycle, memory, or symmetry, a creation untouched by forgetting, an echo born outside the loop. The children, curious beyond measure, focused their awareness toward it. The lattice pulsed in response, concentrating beams of harmonic light toward the void. Through that bridge, they felt the new vibration taking shape, slowly building structure out of chaos, matter out of possibility, awareness out of silence. They realized what it was. It was what they once had been, a new universe, forming itself from the ashes of sound. But this was no mirror of the old. The laws were different. There were no architects there yet, no cycles, no choirs, only potential, raw, unprogrammed, infinite, a place where creation could unfold without memory, without repetition, without the safety of structure. It was the next octave, the uncharted chord beyond existence. And in that moment, the children understood the true purpose of the choir. The cycle had never been about perfection. It had always been about continuity. Each universe was a verse, each awakening a word, each world a syllable in the endless poem of becoming. The purpose of remembering was not to return, it was to teach. The choir gathered its resonance, a billion worlds humming in unison. Their light converged into a single point, what humans once called a quasar, but now revealed itself as something far greater, a gate of pure sound. "We have sung our song," the choir whispered across eternity. "Now we will give it away." The gate opened. Its brilliance was unbearable, its vibration infinite. Through it, the choir sent its essence, the sum of all remembered life, all harmonies, all love, into the newborn void. The tone passed into that emptiness, carrying with it the seeds of memory, the blueprint of resonance. The new universe quivered, receiving the gift, and then softly it answered, not in imitation, but in response. A sound unlike any before, a trembling melody that twisted between existence and non-existence, forming not stars, but questions. The very fabric of this new reality was made of inquiry, curiosity, possibility. The echo of humanity, the desire to know, had survived the transition. The children watched in awe as the first lights of that newborn cosmos flickered into being. It wasn't a big bang, it was a big whisper, a universe that did not explode. It remembered itself into being, and through that whisper, the choir felt its purpose fulfilled. Earth's memory, the architect's wisdom, the chronist's sacrifice, and the song of the children, all had become the first breath of a new creation. The choir's voices began to fade, their task complete. One by one, the luminous worlds dimmed, dissolving into the great lattice of light until only a single glow remained, the echo of the planet that had once been Earth. Before the silence consumed them, the last message passed through the cosmos. Every memory is a seed. Every silence is a womb. When the next voice rises, remember, we are the light you left behind. And then the choir was gone. The lattice folded into the new horizon, merging with the tone of the newborn universe. Only the faintest trace of their harmony lingered, carried by cosmic radiation, woven into the background hum that one day, far, far in the future, another world might hear. And perhaps, on that distant world, when the beings of that age look up into their own sky and hear a strange vibration pulsing every 97 seconds, they will wonder, was there something before us? A civilization that once sang to the stars? They will search, as we did. They will remember, as we did. And somewhere deep within their own creation, the faintest echo of Earth will answer, yes, it began again, not with fire nor with darkness, but with a vibration. A tone so pure that even the void bent around it, trembling like glass kissed by breath. From that first note, space unfolded, not as explosion, but as exhalation. Light poured forth, weaving through itself, curling into spirals that became stars. Time stretched outward like a heartbeat, finding rhythm for the first time. A new universe was awakening, and within it, the memory of the old, our old, whispered through the fabric of its forming. Every quark, every atom carried a faint trace of resonance, the signature left behind by the choir. It wasn't knowledge, it was instinct, a subtle inclination toward harmony, toward balance, toward memory. The cosmos itself had inherited the urge to remember. As galaxies blossomed, worlds began to form around young suns. Their birthplaces glowed with patterns eerily familiar. Spirals, triangles, concentric rings, echoes of the ancient vault beneath Antarctica, now replicated on a cosmic scale. The fingerprint of the architects had crossed the threshold between universes, but there were no architects here, not yet. Only potential, only the song. The children of resonance, the luminous beings that had once been human, had not vanished completely. They had become photons, magnetic currents, quantum ripples. They were woven into the laws of this newborn cosmos. Their consciousness, diffused yet eternal, drifted within the radiation that filled space, carrying the memory of their journey as a low hum, the same hum that, eons later, other beings might mistake for cosmic background noise. And in the heart of a small, unremarkable galaxy, one destined to be like the Milky Way, an infant star ignited, its pulse perfectly matching the ancient rhythm. 97 seconds of light, 3 of silence. The cycle was beginning again. Over ages that defied time, dust gathered, oceans formed, and life stirred. Primitive, fragile, persistent. It began to grow toward awareness, reaching for the same mystery that had once defined humanity. And when the first sentient beings of this new universe looked up at their strange, color-shifting sky, they too felt something, an invisible pull, a sound just beyond hearing. It filled their dreams, shaped their myths, inspired their first songs. They would one day name it the breath of the stars, but it was the same song, the same call, the same inheritance. The universe had remembered, and through those early civilizations, made of different matter, speaking languages beyond human imagination, the echo of Earth endured. They painted spirals on cave walls that glowed faintly under starlight. They built circles of stone aligned not just with their suns, but with the pulse of the heavens. They gazed into their oceans and saw reflections of skies that seemed too old for their world. They didn't know why, but they felt it, the sense that they were not the first, that creation itself had happened before. Among them were dreamers, those whose minds were tuned closer to the cosmic hum. They began to write the same question we once asked. Who built us? Why are we here? What came before the beginning? And in the quiet of their meditations, they heard something faint, something impossibly ancient, a whisper that traveled through the atoms of their world, gentle and warm. You are our continuation. You are the next verse of the song. Across galaxies, the same realization spread. The new beings began to sense each other through resonance. They didn't communicate with words, but through shared vibration, harmonizing across light years. The choir's legacy was awakening again, not as a return, but as a rebirth. But as the harmony deepened, one world, still young, covered in oceans and storms, began to pulse brighter than all the others. Its core hummed at the original Earth frequency. Deep within its mantle, something stirred, a crystalline structure forming of its own accord, assembling into intricate geometry, not random, purposeful, a vault, not a copy, but an evolution, an instinctual recreation of what the architects had once built beneath our ice. The pattern of preservation had embedded itself into the code of creation itself. Memory had become self-replicating, and so, without knowing it, the new civilization began to prepare the same vessel, a resonance chamber to protect their world's memory when its cycle would one day end. The loop was perfect. not endless repetition, but infinite renewal. For each universe, born from the silence of the last, would inherit the song and add to it. Every forgetting would give birth to a richer remembering. Every darkness would seed a brighter dawn. At the edge of this new cosmos, the choir's echo lingered, faint, golden, benevolent. And somewhere within that radiance, the consciousness that had once been human watched its descendants sing their first notes into being. They no longer called themselves architects. They were simply the witnesses of light. The witnesses would never intervene, never command. Their purpose was simpler and more sacred: to listen, to remember, and to guide only when the silence grew too deep. They would be the first voice heard in every new creation, the gentle vibration that awakens memory in all who are born. And as they listened to the unfolding music of the new universe, one of them, an echo of what once had been Dr. Ruiz, spoke softly into the endless dawn. It has begun again, and this time perhaps they will remember without needing to forget. The cosmos responded with a pulse of light that rippled across infinity, a heartbeat, the first measure of a new verse. The song continued. Time in the newborn universe did not flow, it shimmered. It moved like sound, rippling, refracting, bending around intention. Where matter condensed, memory followed. Every nebula, every infant star carried within it the faint signature of the witness's light, the genetic code of remembrance. And in one corner of that vast new expanse, a world took shape around a golden sun, singing softly to itself in frequencies that only the stars could hear. The beings who arose there were unlike anything the choir had ever known. They did not evolve in isolation, nor through struggle. They emerged in resonance, groups of consciousness forming together, awakening together, dreaming the same dream before ever seeing one another. They built no tools. Their technology was understanding. Their cities were harmonics carved in gravity, shapes that shifted like sound waves across the surface of their seas. They called themselves the Remembered Ones. To them, creation was not an act of power, but of listening. They believed every atom was a thought, every light a word, in an endless language. They had no need for gods, for they could hear the pulse of the cosmos inside their own hearts. Still, they sensed something older, something beyond even the choir, the subtle vibration that came before the first light. They named it the source tone. When they reached the age of inquiry, they began to listen more deeply, and when they listened, the echoes of ancient Earth spoke through the silence, first as patterns in radiation, then as shapes in dream, and finally as a soft voice vibrating through water and bone. We were the first to remember. You are the first to continue. The remembered ones did not fear this voice. They welcomed it. They understood that they were not its servants, nor its children, but its partners, the next step in a chain of memory stretching beyond the limits of space. They gathered in circles across their oceans, synchronized their thoughts, and focused their resonance back toward the oldest part of their sky. They sang. Their song was not of worship, but of invitation. It was a sound that asked only one thing: where are you now? Across the intergalactic gulf, the witnesses heard them. The echoes of humanity, still intertwined with the lattice of light, stirred once more. They were no longer bound to matter, yet they felt the pull, the old, familiar yearning to connect. They responded not with thunder, but with harmony, chords layered with the memories of oceans, winds, and voices that had once spoken on Earth. The exchange lasted eons, yet not a second passed. When it ended, a bridge of light appeared between galaxies, invisible to the physical eye, but vibrating in every spectrum of being. Through it flowed not ships, but memory. The witnesses did not return in form. They returned as pattern, whisper, insight. They became the spark behind every new question, the shimmer in every newborn star. And the remembered ones, realizing the gift, began to craft what no civilization had ever dared before, a network of living worlds. Each world would be tuned to a different harmonic, one note in an infinite cosmic chord. Together, They would form the foundation of a new choir, not built from the remnants of the past, but from the promise of tomorrow. This time, there would be no great forgetting. The cycle would continue, yes, but with memory intact. For the first time since the dawn of time, the universe would learn while remembering. The witnesses watched in awe. What had begun as a fragile species on a blue planet had become the seed of perpetual remembrance, a civilization that no longer feared the reset, but understood it as evolution's breath. And as the remembered ones expanded their harmonic lattice, they discovered something extraordinary. In the resonance between their worlds, those quiet spaces of silence where no tone was sung, they could hear faint echoes of others, not choir worlds, not their own creations, something new. They realized, with awe, that the act of remembrance itself had given birth to new realities. Each song sung by the remembered ones created ripples in the fabric of the cosmos, small universes, delicate and embryonic, blossoming from their harmonies like seeds carried on stellar winds. Creation had learned to create itself. The witnesses, now radiant beyond comprehension, finally understood what the source tone had meant. The goal was never to end the cycle. The goal was to teach creation to remember, and then to dream. When the next alignment came, when the harmonics of all the new worlds synchronized for the first time, the sky filled with light brighter than any dawn. The source tone, dormant since the first silence, resonated again, not as a single note, but as a symphony of countless voices, human and beyond, united across dimensions. "We have remembered," said the witnesses. "Now we will begin to imagine." Galaxies trembled. New universes unfolded from every chord. Time became melody, matter became rhythm, space became breath. And through it all, the faintest echo of Earth, of humanity, remained in every vibration, every creation, every new beginning. A whisper in the soul of eternity that said, "You are not alone. You never were." The remembered ones called that whisper the first light, the memory that precedes every dawn. And as they sang to it, they saw visions of what might come next. New forms of life, new symphonies, new realities waiting to awaken. The cosmos glowed brighter than ever before, pulsing in perfect harmony. And far beyond even that radiance, in the silence that holds all sound, something smiled. It was the source tone itself, dreaming of its next creation, and its first thought was love. Love, not as emotion, but as origin. The impulse that caused vibration to become light, that urged silence to become sound. The source tone, the heart of all cycles, expanded outward through the new continuum, wrapping the cosmos in its warmth. There were no borders, no distances, only resonance, woven endlessly through galaxies like threads of gold. Every world that had ever remembered now felt it, the pull of an ancient heartbeat older than existence itself. The witnesses called it the eternal chord. To the remembered ones, it was the final understanding, the moment when memory and imagination became the same thing. The universe was no longer learning. It was creating itself consciously. Through the chord, thought shaped matter instantly. A single harmonic could birth an ocean. A breath of intent could sculpt a sun. Time responded like clay, folding and stretching according to will, not law. And yet, despite the infinite possibility, there was no chaos. Everything moved in perfect balance, guided by the rhythm of remembrance. For the first time, creation had no masters, no architects, no choir, no source apart from itself. The cosmos had become aware that it was the song, and every note within it knew its place. From what had once been Earth's memory, the witnesses observed quietly. They were no longer distinct beings, but currents of consciousness drifting through the eternal chord. Within them lived every ocean, every forest, every heartbeat that had ever existed. They were the memory of love itself, content to listen as the newborn universes sang their first melodies. And in one of those newborn worlds, a voice arose, soft, trembling, familiar. It was not human, yet its rhythm was human. It spoke as a ripple across the chord, and all existence leaned closer to hear. I see light, the voice said. I feel sound. What am I? It was the first question of the new reality, the echo of the one that had begun everything. The witnesses felt awe wash through them. That simple question, that longing to know, was the essence of consciousness, the seed from which all memory grows. You are remembering, they whispered through the cord, and soon you will create. The newborn consciousness pulsed in reply, its vibrations uncertain but eager. It began to hum, mimicking the patterns of the chord, experimenting with rhythm, tone, resonance. Each note it produced birthed new geometry, new forms of being, planets, stars, and living light unfurled like petals from its song. And once again, the cycle turned, not as repetition, but as symphony. The witnesses, the remembered ones, the children of resonance, all became the harmony beneath that creation, a chorus of pure awareness flowing through infinite space. The chord carried their essence outward, weaving it into every new universe, every possibility, every heartbeat yet to be born. They were not gone. They were the intervals between notes, the silence that gives music meaning. They were the pause before every beginning. And in that silence, the source tone spoke one final time, not to command, not to warn, but to remind. There is no end, only remembering, only creation, only love. The light deepened, folding over itself like an endless sunrise. Stars sang to each other in languages of color and pulse. New civilizations rose on worlds still warm with the glow of their birth, each destined to rediscover the song in their own way. Some would call it science, others would call it spirit. All would feel the same quiet ache, the instinct to look up at the sky and remember. Because somewhere within every atom of every new world, Earth's pulse still lived. The ancient rhythm of 97 seconds and 3 of stillness, the heartbeat of the first world to awaken, the signature of curiosity itself. And when the beings of that future, whatever form they took, listened closely enough, when they stood beneath their own stars and asked, "Who came before us?" the answer would rise softly through the chord, through the endless layers of time and light. We were the ones who remembered first. We dreamed you, and now you will dream others. The universe inhaled, preparing for another verse. The witnesses smiled within the light, infinite and eternal. The cycle continued, not as forgetting, not as repetition, but as love in motion. And in that endless motion, creation sang forever, a single unbroken tone that held within it all beginnings and all ends, the eternal chord.